As y'all can see right here, the VR has gotten an update for NU. Woohoo! And of course, there's also a little signal. I am back. And we got this little update done. I made a video before I went on my little trip. And it was me basically just doing my own slate for the VR vote. As I mentioned back then, I wasn't sure when the vote would actually be done. And well, look at that. It's done right in time for me to come home, do a video for y'all. So now we can look at what the VR actually has going on. Before I get too far into it, of course, a little reminder, subscribe right now. If you're not subscribed, just do it. We have great content every day. You like NU? You want to get into NU? You find NU interesting? You like occasional other tiers? You like Joey? If you answered yes to any of those questions, subscribe. Our end of the year goal is 10K. I know we can get it. It's, need a little bit of help from y'all. Now, as you'll notice with this update, we got the new mons ranked from the tier shifts we got. You'll also know you'll notice a lot of downward movement. Not really a lot rose here. And the reason for this is simple, and I put it right here in my post, but the idea was the original VR that we put up in January, that was in initial rankings, and this update was supposed to kind of sift through a lot of the junk that got overranked or ranked, period. Kind of just a little cleanup after we had about a month of meta development. That way we had a better idea of what was like actually worth using in the tier. As a result, since not a whole lot of new stuff has really ticked up outside of like Sun, kind of, most things just went down in ranking. Also, I think a little bit of desire, maybe from certain voters, was top of the VR should be kind of small relative to the rest. And so, as you'll see, our top ranks are generally pretty small. Only like the best of the best mons are intended to be this high. So, I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to work from the top to the bottom, and maybe I'll jump down to the unranks. Who knows? So, Basket Legion and A. Anybody is playing NU knows, one, that I absolutely love using this Pokemon, but two, it has been one of the best new additions to the tier. Scarf being the dominant set, of course. Adaptability Scarf is just really, really good. Imagine Inteleon, but it's a physical attacker, is probably the most succinct way I can put it, because Basket Legion is basically a lot stronger than Inteleon. There's no basically to it. Inteleon is not nearly as strong as Basket Legion. It's got the coverage advantage, but that doesn't really matter a lot of time for Legion. You've got Stab Pivot, and really, mostly we just need a Wave Crash anyway. I mean, I can go on about this point forever, but we will look at the tier list, and we will look for good bulky water resistances. That is bulky, helmet, that helps, but not a resist without Terra. This is not bulky, not a resist without Terra. This is a good check. It's just, spikes go up, maybe that's a problem if you keep getting flipped on. Serena, that's like one of the few really good ones. Plume is good. Dragalge is Psychic Fangs, it's a little bit freaky. Avalugg, honestly, Avalugg usage is kind of low right now. I would not have been shocked if it dropped. Gligar, this mon is forced into the worst 50-50 every turn on whether to Terra Water on the flip turn or not Terra and die to Wave Crash. And you see the point, a lot of the resistances or checks to Legion are kind of situational. As a result, the mon is just impeccable. Great revenge killer, basically any sort of wall breaker in the tier. Even something like Inteleon, you don't need a lot of chip for your Wave Crash to send it back to win a game. I even like this mon on Rain. I've talked about it before. I actually think Scarf adaptability is not bad on Rain. Pretty decent option. But also, and this shouts out to one of the new VR voters we got, the Doc. You all know who the Doc is. But Legion as well, having Aqua Jet for priority. Very, very nice. A tier with so many threats. Like, even something like Inteleon, man. If you gotta revenge it with an Aqua Jet because you have a choice banded Basket Legion, hey, man, nothing wrong with that. You gotta revenge kill the Gallade once the Psychic Terrain ends, and you're banned with Aqua Jet? Go for it, man. There's a lot of threats. That Jet's useful for picking off. All this keeps them on at A. It's also, this is probably like the more low-key bit of the reasons. It's actually like a good Inteleon switch-in, kind of. Like, at the end of the day, like, yeah, hazards are probably going to get two-shot if Inteleon Terra Water specs Hydro Pumps you, but that's an awful lot of adjectives. And I'll always remind people, when you keep adding on those adjectives, just know how much more situational you're making your own case here, too. So, Really good mon. Really good ranking. Hisui Decidueye only in B. I think the main issue is it's relegated to utility purposes so far, at least in my experience seeing it get used. And let's be real, it's barely gotten usage. And Serena's just hard to outclass. Like this mod has, this should be in theory so much better because you have the, I was gonna say trifecta, but there's 4 moves. The quadrants, the quadrant of broken. Doesn't feel like the right word, but triple arrows, broken move. Knockoff, broken move. Roost, great move. And in default, great move. You have a lot of really nice options on this one, and none of it ends up mattering because Serena is faster, it's relatively as bulky, and Serena doesn't really care about having, you know, triple axle. Nah, why can't I speak? Serena doesn't really care about having triple arrows. You've got whip, axle, U-turn, synthesis as well, so you have recovery, high jump kick. I probably missed something in there for useful moves, but Serena's got a ton of useful stuff too, that it kind of, just having that extra flexibility kind of outweighs triple arrows being a kind of cheesy move that ends up, I mean, relatively speaking, right, on a defensive mon, it's not as useful of a move compared to if you're running offensive Hisui to Sid. Now, if offensive sets pick up, maybe this one gets a little better. It implies grassy terrain could be good enough, I think, or even just generic HO. Generic HO, there's a little bit more competition, though, for the fighting type spot, unless you stack them. And I don't really think that this stacks as well with fighters you'd see on HO, because you're thinking mostly Lucario at that point, or like Hitmonlee. I guess It and Lee would stack fine, but I think at that point, I'd rather run them together on like grassy terrain. Because that way you could really maximize both of those mons a little bit more effectively. But like Lucario doesn't really share the same checks as Hisui to Sid. It's a mon. I don't think it's bad. It is a mon that if Serena wasn't in the tier, it'd be like A-ish, maybe A even. But Serena's just a bit better. Electivire, it's unranked because it's garbage. Alolan Exeggutor, only in B, I think mostly comes down to the other dragon types being better. And it has the same issues that any of those other ones would have with regards to like speed. And as a result, like getting revenge killed by everything. And the defensive typing isn't necessarily offering a ton. I think SD Custap is really cool, but it's not the strongest still, and you are reliant on getting your Custap procs with Endure, which sometimes you don't get Harvest activating them. That can be a little bit detrimental. It's a little of an awkward mon, I would say, to use as well, because if you're thinking about how to support it, well, if you want hazard control, which you probably will want, just because you don't want to, you want to have as much HP as possible for room between where you're at and where your Custap area is. And you're probably not stacking with Altaria. You're probably not stacking with Serena. Hitmontop's kind of, not really that good of a mon. Hazard control with it is kind of difficult. I mean, you're looking up here. What's a hazard move I really want to use with this? Like, as we go down, which one of these do I really want to use? Like, Avalugg, yeah, I don't think I'd use Avalugg on the same team. Yeah, I go down the list more and more. I'm looking for hazard control as well along the way. We're Defog Oricorio in this climate? No, I don't think so. So, little weird mon to support. I think the potential for it's also just a lot lower than your other setup sweeper, so people don't care about it as much. And then, like, I think this mon being now, after the update, ranked the same tier as Goodra is pretty fair. I mentioned the other dragons being better. Dragalge is the other dragons, because Goodra I don't think is really outclassing this at all. So I think that's a pretty fair spot. Gallade in B+, with definite room to rise as Psychic Terrain becomes more and more renowned and refined and polished. Gallade under Psychic Terrain is kind of just not fair in a certain sense of the word, in that you have a fighting type, but you can't really check with traditional means of checking a fighting type, because it's got Psychic Stab, and that kind of dunks on all the resistances. And then you've got a Psychic type that you don't really check with traditional Psychic type checks, because it Sacred Swords them in the mouth, and if you're like a Scrafty or a Registeel, it doesn't really work for you. And the Psychic Terrain really amps the issues up, because then you look at a lot of the blanket checks that people would use to a physical attacker like Gallade, and now they're all two-shot. Like, Gligar is gone. That is not a check anymore. Palace, no, these are not any more checks, and this isn't taking into, you know, SD into account either, which just lets you one-shot basically anything slower than you, outside of some very, very random mons like Avalugg, maybe. It's got sturdy, but say that lost 1 HP, just for the sake of the example. I think even with Terra, Avalugg might die. Very, very strong mon. I could definitely see this being just a proponent of the VR update having been done a little late. Because we were waiting for people to vote. Took a little longer than we thought. So maybe Gallade goes up to like A next rank. I don't know. Very good mon though. Golurk B+. This will always kind of be the issue for a mon like Golurk, because we've seen with Embor, where they're incredibly strong breakers that you even get a little bit more mileage out of in other ways, because they don't just break. They have a bit of utility to them. With Embor, it's like knockoff and sucker punch stuff. With Golurk, it's being a ground type, being a spin blocker, even though like trying to spin block a Serena or Avalugg sounds just truly dreadful. But it's a thing. Your Toxtricity check. Your check does something else as well that I remember. I just can't... What's the mon I wanted to mention here? Wait, I guess Pawmod counts, but that's not the mon I want to talk about here. I'm looking up here just to see if I see it. Oh, Glowbro, thank you. Thank you, Rabia. But... you have some weird, useful defensive utility. You could run utility sets as well. I saw some people talk about, like, AV Embor. And, I mean, AV Golurk exists as well with, like, Klutz. You can do Klutz Trick an AV onto something like a horse. It's a lot easier to deal with. But, at the end of the day, it has a lot of exposable weaknesses. Like, it's just very, very slow. If you're running choice sets, well, you're very, very prediction reliant, and you're running moves with not necessarily common immunities when you look at Ghost, but common relevant switch-ins that can make it kind of hard to break. And then if you don't run Band, you start facing questions of, okay, why use Golurk? It becomes harder to justify because you lose that certain level of like nuclear bomb detonation wall breaking. So, fun mon. I love using it, but it does have some limitations on the teams you're going to get it on. Then we got Grimmsnarl B+. I'm going to be honest with y'all, I have no clue why this mon is B+. I fail to see what Grim does in this meta. I don't know. I don't think the pivot sets are very... Maybe I'm underrating them. I just don't think they're as good. I guess it helps still that at the end of the day, it's priority parting shot to pivot. So even though you've got more mons in the tier now that check you, it's not really that bad. And, you know, Diancie blocks the pivot, but Diancie's only one mon. How many player ups, if you throw in hazards, is it going to switch into? I think, too, having Scrafty back, though, is pretty big for it, is, like, an issue it faces. And trying to leverage its bulk like you used to kind of be able to do with some of those bulky setup sets isn't as easy, because now, instead of trying to switch on, like, a Mesprit, trying to switch on, like, Indeedee under terrain. And yes, you still are immune to E-Force, but it's Indeedee under terrain. The mon is just scary. You can't even sucker punch it like you could a Mesprit. Just have fun switching to Chandelure Flamethrower. I'm sure it'll go well for you. Tell your kids about it. Stuff like that makes me a lot lower on Grim. And of course, screens just aren't relevant in this tier. At least not dual screens. Not in the same way they would be without Light Clay being banned. So, yeah. Hitmonlee in B, and I agree with the doc in his post he made. I think this may be even a little high of a ranking. He's just not very good. I think I've used it enough in videos to say that, without much elaboration. The difficulty this mon has with setting up, it just feels so immense. And I don't think it really gives me a lot more in a slot than, like, Lucario would. Even on terrain, I feel like Lucario is sometimes just better. Like, Psychic terrain, sure, you're not running Lucario there because priority, right? You're probably not going to be able to make much use of your E-speed. But dang, man. What the hell is this mod supposed to be doing? Setting up so hard, because even with, like, a seed boost, you're still just so fragile. Really sucks, really sucks. I think Terra Fire stuff's cool, though. I do think it's cool. Being able to lure in Plume and smash it with a Blaze Kick after his Sword Stance, woo, that gets me ready. And an Indeedee and A-, pretty nice standalone breaker. And I feel like with this spawn, you honestly get a lot more enabling of semi-terrain. So whether it's on HO, whether it's on just a normal team. As we saw, I mentioned in the fake Glassstray video, I'll call it, the Eternally game, where he had an offense team with like semi-rain with the Floatzel Klefki core. You can kind of do the same thing with Indeedee plus, say, Lee, because Lee's going to probably be the best example, where you could run Indeedee on it, just generic HO, throw Hitmonlee on there with a Psychic Seed, and then you still have a good mon for breaking, but also for, like, support Healing Wish. So it's nice for that. And of course, Terra Psychic Expanding Force calcs are just funny. Compared to this, or compared to last gen, though, I struggle to see Indeedee as, like, being broken, because with defensive Terras, there's increased likelihood that you run into random Terra Steels, random Terra Darks, etc., to really limit this mon's ability to just run rampant through builds like it used to be able to. We got Lucario to A. I probably would have both of these in the same rank, or honestly swap Luke to be above Palmot, but SD Luke's very, very, very scary. Even something like Bandit is not too bad. I mean, you just get strong E-speeds. And a lot of the mods that want to switch into Lucario at +0 don't do it too well at +1. Because they're mods that are trying to switch in as an SDs to maybe try and like KO it after an SD if Luke doesn't one-shot it. Like think about your like Flygon of the world. If I'm gonna switch in a Terra Steel Flygon or something into Lucario, it doesn't go too well if I just get mashed on the switch in and die. Or like Mudsdale, if I'm just taking like a huge CC on the switch in, it might not be the end of the world because I am a Mudsdale, but how much chip is really needed before I'm two-shot? So there's that. And again, it kind of goes back to the Hitmonlee point about how setup can be kind of difficult, even Lucario. I saw some people talk about Air Balloon on Luke. I do think that's a really good idea, especially since Flygon doesn't very often run like Fire Punch or Superpower coverage. So not only do you get extra revenge killing opportunities, or not revenge killing, setup opportunities, we even get like just insurance against revenge killers like that. So that kind of helps with SD stuff, but I think CB kind of forcing the issue is cool. Plot sounds kind of but I haven't tried it yet, so we'll see. Palmot, like I said, I think maybe A+ is high, but I could see it. This mon is an insane wall breaker. The gripes I have with it end up just being kind of cluttered speed tier. Not in the best of spots, and I think people need to stop trying rest with natural cure. Personally, I think with a mon that has this bad of bulk, you're better off just maximizing your turns on the field to just hit stuff. And if you don't like Life Orb Recall, hey man, just run Boots. Just run Boots. Or run Banded, man. I don't think Orb is bad. I think Orb Natural Cure has a niche, but it's not something I'm fond of with this type of mon. But yeah, basically, this is kind of mon where I just say look at the calcs for, because I don't like saying that with mons too much of the time because I think it takes away a lot of context. So like the Inteleon people, when they're like, look at the calc of my Hydro Pump. I don't care. You put on like 12 modifiers to get a barely 2-hit KO on an Umbreon. Shut up, noob. So, and a thing with that, but with Palma, I think a lot of it's pretty straightforward, where proper prediction carries it a long way. Mach Punch is pretty cool as well. Just in case something like a Flygon just to pick you off, it has to be careful about the range of HP it's at. And Double Shock, in some matchups, is just unfair. Especially, this kind of comes into the whole... Flygon is the... Oh god, give me a moment. There we go. This kind of comes into the whole Flygon as a dominant ground type issue, though. Because with that, the pivots of the Double Shock are just naturally a little bit shakier. You don't have that immunity that's so common, so you may be relying on like a Plume or a Serena. These are very vulnerable to your coverage, whether it's Ice Punch or CC. In the case of Serena, of course, CC. And Flygon as the ground is different to Muds because, well, Flygon isn't tanking an Ice Punch or CC very well. So again, you talk about like with some of those earlier mons, like Gallade, for example, that reliance on some blanket checks that even then can be a little vulnerable to being overwhelmed. I still don't know if that's A+ worthy for Palma, but it is one of the best breakers in the tier. Rampardos is unranked because it's shit. Whimsicott is C because I don't know. There has not been a single Whimsicott usage in a tournament game. I haven't seen it on the ladder much more than 1 or 2 times. Presumably, it still has some of its utility moves, but it lost a lot. And I don't know. Specs sounds really awful this gen because it's just so much bulkier than prior ones. I don't know how you run Specs and feel good about it. But yeah, there's Whimsicott. It's another fairy smile. Inteleon, again, after the unban, it's still one of the best mons in the tier. It still has calls for a ban, which will not be happening. You cannot peer pressure me into banning this mon another time. Wait out another week. You'll live. And it's not broken anyway. But, again, what I always talk about with why I like Inteleon for the tier, gives balance and option for just insanely fast breaker, which is something I think it really values having, so that you're not reliant on, like, choice scarfers all the time being your method of speed control, and then also needing to throw in another breaker that's not really that fast, but instead sits in this like absolutely muddied speed tier. Inteleon just offers a lot for that, and I think that the drawbacks are noted enough to keep it from like S rank / ban worthy territory, where like it's a phenomenal wall breaker, and I'd probably say it's the best in the tier, at least in a vacuum. But I think the issues with speed, or so, not speed, with frailty are so noted that it prevents it from being too much higher. Because priority is always going to keep this mon in just absolutely limited. Hazard control is also always going to keep it limited, much like how I talked about with Ambipom. You get your hazards up, Inteleon cannot U-turn spam like it wants to as easily, because you keep U-turning on my Stealth Rocket Spike. You will have like 2 turns left of switch again in no time, I assure you. So that's my view with that. And also, again, I mean, Terra Water Hydro, but okay, I Terra Dragoned by Serena and killed you with Power Whip. Congrats. I say that as like, you know, Inteleon would be going for Ice Beam, but I live in Ice Beam. I'm different like that, you know? And it's crafty A+. It's still one of those like warping mons in terms of how you gotta build into it. Is you give it an inch, it takes a mile. Bulk upsets are just very, very hard to stop without, at least personally, I think you really need to have some sort of like setup disruption for those. Or have like a fairy type that forces the Terra, and then a mon that can come out pretty quickly on a double switch and bunk it even after it boosts with a bulk. Meanwhile, then like you got Dragon Dance stuff, which is the same stuff, but has a lot more snowballing potential with Moxie. The gripes, of course, with DD are always going to be that it's slow even with a boost. Terra kind of helps cover for that in the same way you'd run maybe Choppleberry Scrafty in Gen 7. But you only get 1 Terra per battle, so you don't always have that available. Very good mon, though. And it helps, too, that the fairy types aren't, like, overly common beyond Diancie. Kind of hurts that Diancie's a mon that can mess with you post-Terra, potentially, depending on what Terra you are. If you're Terra Steel, yeah. If you're Terra Poison, less likely. But Diancie got Encore as well to lock you up. But Sylveon being out of the picture helps, because that's one less mon that helps, or it helps force a Terra on the opponent's end of it. And then Florges just isn't, like, godly common. I will say, I mean, Terra Blast Ground Florges being probably the best set it has is a little bit iffy for Scrafty, since the most common Terra types are Poison and Steel, so you get goobed either way. But, yeah, I mean, all that doesn't really stop Scrafty from being great. And then we get to our 4 rises. Ninetales up to B+. I talked about it a little bit earlier. Sun is just viewed as a bit better now. More consistent weather than people used to think of it, even with Hisui and Lilligant gone. And this really just comes down to people figuring out the optimal ways to build Sun. Ditto goes up to B because offense is still really, really strong in this metagame. And Ditto helps a lot there, so pretty easy. Houndstone is still the best spin blocker even after the tier shifts happened. So, B- rise, given it doinks on literally every spinner we have. Serena, Hitmontop, Avalugg, I think that's really the only ones that are too relevant. Colossal is funny enough, a decent enough Houndstone answer. At least if you have Flamethrower, but you beat up on all the others pretty well. You also check Lucario pretty well, which is a huge benefit. You check Palmot decently enough. Pretty decent option for a bulky fighting type check. And at Paldean Tauros, Blaze up to B-. This is a mon that I really don't think is that good, but if you look at a lot of the traditional fighting checks in the tier right now as we go up here, outside of Glowbro, it's not terrible into them. The main focus here is going to be on Plume, though. Plume's relied on to check a lot of the fighters, and I mean, this Paldean Tauros can beat it, which I guess is something. I mean, I'll be honest, I really don't see the appeal of it. You look at the top tier of this meta, I don't know what it's doing over Aqua Tauros other than beating Plume. If beating Plume is viewed that highly, then you know what? Sure. And it's a good Serena matchup, too. So there's that as well going for it. Now, 25 minutes to talk about just this much right here. This was 25 minutes. Now we have to talk about all of this, which is honestly not that much as I look at it, especially because C-rank stuff I'm going to barely talk about. But let's get into it, especially the unranked. This is getting like a sentence. Flamingo drops. Originally, it was looking like it was going to drop a lot further, like to A-. And then we had the quick ban of Auric Warrior Pum Pum and even Iron Thorns. And that helped to rebound it up a bit, because the big issue it was facing was giving Pom Pom the freest of setup. And even Thorn's pretty free setup if you were locked into Brave Bird. With those gone, it's a little bit better. You still risk giving Thunderous a couple too many free turns. And I think as the other fighters have just kind of solidified as maybe a little bit better. Like, Flamingo doesn't feel like that. Since Flygon's like the best Scarfer, it's hard to justify Flamingo as often as you'd like. A little bit more resistant to hazards, of course, since it's a ground type with Levitate, so you take a little less. And Glowbro existing everywhere and punishing both your stab moves, it's kind of bad. Thunderous, again, like we said, even though it dropped a sub rank, it still punishes you much like how Pum Pum did, just without having the durability to do it throughout the whole game. I think really this is mostly just a reflection of it's still really good, but it's not like meta-defining good, and that's usually where you see your A+ and S rank mons be. It could get back up there. I think if Glowbro were to leave, it probably would be back up there, but for now, I think A is fine. Thunderous to A. I'm gonna give you one little quick thing here. I don't know why it dropped, but what I would say is the speed tier with Inteleon back isn't nearly as good, and you still feel pretty pressured to Terra to avoid a Flygon Revenge killing you. Scarf Meloetta is also like really, really relevant. Palma, you often don't have a coverage before. Every read the utility set, you're often just seeding turns to Palma. Of course, Scarf Paladin Tauros, you don't really have a Terra type you want to run for that. And then there's just a litany of mons that are kind of annoying to get past, like Diancie, for example. You've got Serena even can be kind of annoying without Terra Blast flying helping, or like Acro. Basque Legion, again, this kind of plays in the whole, there's not really a convenient Terra type here. It's like, I feel like there's just a ton of small things that knock Thunders down a bit. Umbreon goes down, but this is what I've talked about for a bit. Meta's not as kind of these Wish Pass builds as it once was. They're still quite good, though, so it only dropped A. And Umbreon's just better than Sylveon. Again, Toxic makes this Spawn feel immortal and unstoppable at once. It really gives me Gen 7 Vaporeon vibes. To less of an extreme, because I think the tiers just, you got more offensive power going against Umbreon, so it's not as bad as somehow as Vapo used to feel, where it was just unkillable. And yes, I do mean Gen 7, not Gen 8. Gen 7 Vaporeon, you can talk to some SMN viewers. There were games where it somehow would find a way to just 6-0 as the last one. But Umbreon kind of does the same this gen to a lesser extent, because the breakers around it are better at punishing it. Raj goes to A-, is kind of just Registeel solidifying itself as the best steel type. Raj is still incredible, in my view. I probably would have just kept him in the same rank or moved Reggie up one, but it be what it be. Salazzle drops all the way to B+. This is kind of like correcting an over-ranking originally, because Salazzle just really hasn't seen enough usage to justify that high of a rank in a while. And Inteleon returning also kind of hits it, because in prior metas where Inteleon got banned, often Salazzle stepped up as an alternative for some of these balanced builds, because it was still comparatively fast, and yeah, you lost a lot of breaking power, but you still got a lot of utility back out of Lazzle, so it wasn't as bad. And now it's just kind of like, gotta deal with Flygon outspeeding me, gotta deal with Inteleon outspeeding me, gotta deal with Diancie on every other team, gotta deal with offensive builds being like really good. There's still Jergalgis everywhere. Scrafty's a check. Paldean Tauros too. Kind of tough. Delphox drops for some similar reasons. Of course, the speed is less noted because Fox isn't nearly as fast. I think Fox is just... The way I'd say it with Fox is it kind of struggles with identity at times, where I think people want to use it as a sweeper, where it's more of a breaker. And you have to dedicate Protect on it, it feels like, in this metagame, to not just get limited the entire game. And just like Salazzle, again, a lot of his mons, same exact offensive mons give it the issues that Lazzle faces. It's just, I think, and Lazzle could do the same thing too with Tech, right? It's just, I think Lazzle, a lot of people want to go more utility route instead of like plot protect stuff. It's just a little bit iffy, I think, having to spam Tech the whole game, especially because teams can still pivot around you pretty reliably. Like Dancy, again, mentioned that mon is like something that's rather relevant and reliable at beating down that sort of set. Scrafty even is not a bad option. You can force the Terra. And there's just a ton of revenge killers that give you a lot of gripes with Fox. So, still a solid mon, but I don't love it. Keys falls to B+. I think people typically just want the bulk of Registeel, and there's other spikers that are preferred, like help Gligar, for example, right now. If you're going for spikes, is a pretty decent option. Go back up here. Deancey is an okay enough option for spikes. You just don't really see it run the move too often. It's kind of weird. I feel like we don't have many spikers in the top tier, despite spikes being pretty universally regarded as like really, really good in this metagame. So that's something to keep an eye on. Maybe we'll see more experimentation with our spikers. I think really since Overquill left, we just have not seen as much of it because people aren't using like Quillfish, for example, right? And Keys falling off because, again, I mean, Registeel is just so much bulkier, and there's a little bit more to Reggie than there is Keys. Sceptile drops to B+. I think Terrain getting more options has pushed Sceptile priority down a little bit. More options at this point is just Hitmonlee, which isn't really like that detrimental to Sceptile. But I see it now. Y'all might be confused because Grafai dropped later. This is my own opinion here. I think Grafai being another option that also does a little bit more defensively for these terrain teams does kind of hurt Sceptile a bit. And you often have, so often have to dedicate your Terra to this mon to get it to actually break. The base 85 attack is really, really limiting. That's why I see so much compensation for Sceptile with maximizing HP on the EVs. Always, again, having to dedicate your Terra flying so that you do actually get the acro boosted damage. And then just the eternal struggle of having the right last coverage move only to still be walled by something. Enough of these things come together to punish Sceptile. And also, it's just like, I think people don't feel it's as necessary on this terrain teams anymore, so it gets knocked out of the A ranks. Sylveon drops. I think part of this is its move pool is kind of shit without Heal Bell. So like a lot of time you're just, if you're running Wish Protect, it's H-Voice, Calm Mind, and there's not much to do. You can run random coverage, but meh, not that great. You can run Specs, but again, I feel like you're just forced to Terra because otherwise you're getting Registeeled. Or even like Paparajid still. And it's not that impressive as a breaker. I mean, compared to like other mons at the same speed tier, we talked about like Imborn Golurk. It doesn't really feel like it does that much different than those. And then you want to look at Wish sets, yeah, Umbreon just feels so much more annoying to beat because of Toxic. Even though Calm Mind in theory is like kind of nice, you just didn't run into all the anti-setup issues like Haze and Encore and Trick. So, poor Sylveon. Brute Bonnet down to B, Spore Ban moment. Though, if you ask the doc, he will say that Assault Vest Brute Bonnet is the greatest thing to ever grace this metagame. So, maybe try out some AV Brute Bonnet. Go like Stomping Tantrum, Seed Bomb, Sucker Punch, Crunch. Maybe drop Seed Bomb for CC. Probably not, actually. Probably run Seed Bomb still. But there are still some options. They're just not Spore. They're just not Spore, man. And then we got Snorlax dropping to B. I would have dropped it further. I don't think this mon is good. I'm not going to talk more about Snorlax, so I've given you the book of Snorlax hate, so we're good here. Goodra drops because, as I've talked about in the past, compared to Dragalge especially, it is just such a slow-paced Pokemon that offers not a lot comparatively to Umbreon, which is also pretty slow-paced, or Registeel. All the time people just, you default to Dragalge because you're getting a lot of the same type of defensive usefulness, but T-Spike and Flip Turret is just prioritized a bit more because it helps keep the agency of where the battle's going a bit more in your favor. Compared to like Goodra, where I'm like knocking and Toxic and very, very slowly chipping away at the team and doing nothing else. Umbreon is chipping away at the other team very, very slowly, but it's also supporting its team with Wish Passes. You know, Dragology, same thing, where it's kind of chipping away very slowly with maybe its Dracos and Sludge Bombs, but you're also getting a T-Spike there, which maybe wins you the whole game. You're flip turning, you're getting that momentum. Joe-mentum, if you will. So there's that. Yeah, then we have the Grafii drop. I think people just maybe don't love Grafii. I mean, it's not like it's some phenomenal mod, so I'm not shocked to see it go to B. I personally would just keep it same rank as Sceptile. Screamtail drops, it should go down to like C because this mon is trash. But yeah, I mean, I think it was ranked originally kind of highly for like Encore and maybe also the dual setup set. But it hasn't continued to see too much usage compared to the end of last month, beginning of this month. Altaria drops from B+ to B-, which is a little confusing to me, because I still think it's a pretty decent remover, but the fact remains it is incredibly passive, unless you got like Perish Trap, which has its own issues. So those passivity issues just end up making people not want to use it, because, yeah, I mean, do you really want the mod that's not that bulky and not good enough at deterring random mons that come again, being your defogger? At least something like Hitmontop gives you a ton of extra stuff with priority. You know, like you're gonna use a doo-doo remover. At least use Hitmontop. And I think also too, there's like Dragon Fairy Steel Cores that you probably run. I think those are usually just better suited to have like a Dragology, and then you figure out the removal elsewhere. But defensively, its defensive profile isn't overly unique either, which kind of hurts it, because you can just use a Plume or even a Glowbro, which achieves something kind of comparable. So yeah, hard to justify. P2, Porygon 2 saw a little usage at the start of our NUCL tournament. And I think a lot of that was just to check Chandelure at the very, very start, because Shandy was like looking super scary as a new drop. And even just kind of decent at checking some of the other mons in the tier that are like offense team troublemakers, like say Typhlosion if you're on Flashfire. You just trace it under Sun and you don't care. But since then it's really not done much else, so it drops a bit. It was also kind of nice because of the Demon Reggie set. You saw a little bit of people running like Terra Ghost on it to try and sort of outstall it. Even though I'm still unsure you actually outstalled Registeel. But we saw it as a deterrent, so there's that. Thwacky falls because people like Psychic Terrain a bit more than Grassy Terrain right now. And the Iron Thorn ban kind of does push it in more favor of Psychic Terrain, since Thorns is a huge enabler for Grassy Terrain. And just since that it was just like one of the most ideal mons to put on the team. Torn drops because why use Tornadus when you can use Thunderous? That's my opinion at least. A Bomb Snow. Oh wait, I skipped one. Bruxis drops because people continuously think less of the whole niche of, okay, but what if I combined Paldean Tauros and Floatzel into one and got this ugly fish? Because that's essentially what it does. You run Scarf and then you have Flip Turn, and you're also still strong and you're fast, but you're faster than Floatzel. It's just, there's a lot going on there that doesn't really end up coming together into being too good of a mon. A Bomb Snow goes to C because we're not really seeing much done with Snow or even really Veil right now. Gardeku and Ohisui Braviary both continue dropping because they literally don't get used. Bronzong goes down to C. Mostly, it just feels like it's such an awkward defensive typing to get to work. And it has a lot of the same passivity issues that some of these mons like Altaria have, where if they just had Toxic, they'd probably be a lot better. But they don't. I saw Ifo mention, I think it was Ifo, where he's like, yeah, Toxic on Bronzong with Toxic compared to Bronzong without Toxic, it's like two different Pokemon, and it's really true. Because this mod's defensive profile is really unique in a good way, too. Levitate Steel is great. At times, it's just good at forcing switches because it's bulky and checks things, like, again, like Torn, Sylveon, I'm trying to think of other mons. Flygon, like, you're good at forcing switches and getting Toxics on mons, but without Toxic, you can't do that anymore. Heracross drops because it is kind of just a slow teams merchant. You only really beat up on some of these, like, fat builds with gut sets. And when you're not running into those, you're facing constant offense, Heracross just ends up being a worse option than your other fighters like Palmot and Lucario that have priority. Or, you know, throw in Aqua Tauros there too. It's got priority. It can be Scarf very, very reliably. Hitmontop goes down to C because it's Hitmontop, man. All the priority is really nice, but the offense meta is like at the forefront of the tier. But as the months gone on, we've seen more balance pop up, and I do think that kind of hits at Himmeltop's viability. And you would say maybe, okay, the tier's slowing down a bit. Why isn't Heracross better? It's not slowing down enough. That's really just it. You know, there's ranges to these things. Slowed down enough to where Hitmontop's not that good because you don't need the priority spam, but not enough to where Heracross then steps up. And even then, Heracross is always going to have to contend with better fighters, so it might be an uphill battle. Jolteon down to C because this mon hasn't been used this century. You can't convince me. Or Bailey, I think that was how you told me to say it, viewer. It drops down to C as well because it's not gotten usage really. I think I've seen one usage of it this month. And then that's not really the most inspiring. Rotom-Mow continues dropping because no one's using this. I think, honestly, Rotom-Mow is only ranked still off of Hopium. That this Gen 8 NU God will somehow find a way to become viable. I really think it's a matter of the thought process I've given y'all before. I'm like, surely this isn't that bad. I think that's a lot for the Rotom-Mow usage. Surely it can't be that bad. No, it is. It really is. Again, it lost just Defog. Nothing else between generations officially. It got Pain Split back. I'm sure it lost something else, but like, in terms of the core moves it had, all it lost was Defog at this point. And it's literally bordering on unviable. I find that insane. Sandslash down to C again is just kind of... It's a pretty cope mon. And I'll always say that I really like Sandslash. It just, you need so many things in a team slot to justify a Sandslash. You end up needing so many things going in Sandslash's way for it to end up being the mon worth using. And yeah, much time is just not going to be the mon worth using. And I'm gonna be honest, we just have like one of the most random drops I've seen. I don't really know why Typh fell. My take would be that Typhlosion is not viewed by others on console as integral to Sun as like Charizard. Like that's really all I have to offer for you. So yeah. And now we get to the unranks where I will be saying very little about these mons because they're all garbage. Some of them maybe I'll have a little more to say. But like in DD, for example, it got unranked because the male one is better. That's it. Rhydon got unranked. I mean, it's hard to justify Rhydon when you got Mudsdale, Gligar, and Flygon all at the top. Palisand is like kind of there too. Is still a pretty okay option. Dawn, the use case for is just hard to get. It's like kind of Sandslash-esque where it's very, very specialized. And just don't need a lot of time. Just run, like, especially if it's a Mudsdale, ends up covering a lot of the ground a Dawn would. Alchemy unranked because no one uses this. Arboliva unranked because, again, grassy terrain a little bit less good than it was, and Thwacky's generally the setter people want, so Arboliva harder to justify. Electrode, nobody uses you anymore. Frostmoth, nobody has used this month. Lantern, which I feel bad for it, because this dude just nominated it to go up to B-. I don't even think Lantern is, like, unviable for the record, because you could even go Water Absorb and you have an Unteleon counter. But it's Lantern, man. I feel like we're desperate for bulky water types, but we're not Lantern desperate, you feel? Lilligant, unranked. Again, it's just very expendable as a Sun slot. Malamar, unranked because no one's used it. Mismagius, unranked because it's like slot is entirely for maybe Scarf, Memento on HO. We've really not seen it much since. This unrank is going to be one that I just say I don't really know. I think you could just keep Alolan Sandslash ranked alongside Abomasnow at that point. Just say they're both C. We've even seen a little bit of this as like a steel type on teams with knockoff, Stealth Rock, Rapid Spin being pretty good utility that it offers. Yeah, it's just a case of I don't know why we unranked Alolan Sandslash. Presumably because it's just kind of not great as a steel type and you need a lot of extra support through like... You basically have to throw another good special wall with it, but I'd still keep it ranked. Shiftry unranked, again, I'd probably still say it's C because it's good enough as a Sun user, but it is what it is. It doesn't get a lot of usage. Venomoth unranked because this just doesn't get usage, especially with a Sleep Powder ban. Virizion unranked because this has not gotten NU usage at all. And then Wo-Chien unranked. Despite RU still having like B rank, which I'm convinced there is someone in RU that is addicted to Wo-Chien. They can't stop using it. They can't get enough of it. Because this mod, I see it in you. I'm like, there's no way I'm using a defensive Grass and Dark. I don't care that I can Terra. I'm not burning my Terra on a wall. It does nothing but just sit around and be fat. Now, again, granted, I think Wo-Chien probably is okay enough in C rank. But it's hard to argue against unranking it because it really doesn't do much other than be annoying. And I don't know, is the niche of being annoying that valid? Take it up with someone else. That's our VR update. I'm gonna scroll up to the top here real quick so we can just look at the VR. Look at it in all its new glory. I hope y'all enjoyed this little coverage of our official update now. I'll probably be back in about a couple weeks with another VR update where it's, you know, with the new drops. I don't know how polished that VR will look, but do know it'll be fun to talk about. So thank y'all for watching. Thank y'all for watching while I was gone as well. I do appreciate the continued support. And let's get to 10K by the end of the year, guys. And girls. And those that don't label yourself as either of those. Gotta keep the inclusivity grind up. Love y'all. Take care. See you next time. Peace.